This video is made for entertainment purposes only. When a badly hurt Bigfoot was brought to my science lab in 1998, I never thought that helping it would show me the biggest secret in human history. What I learned about where these creatures really came from went against everything we know about how life changes over time, how humans grew and developed, and where we fit in the natural world. My name is Dr. Victor Hartley. I'm 43 years old and I study how living things change over time, and this is the story that made me lose my job, my good name, and almost my life, but it showed me the truth that the world really needs to know. September 14th, 1998. I remember this date so clearly because it's the day everything changed. I was working late at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute, a private building hidden away in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, about 40 miles from Seattle. Our lab studied rare and endangered animals, especially large animals, and I'd spent the last 15 years of my work life there, moving up from young researcher to boss of the department that studies how life changes over time. The building had the newest equipment, paid for by a mix of government money and private gifts from groups that protect nature. We had everything. Machines that read DNA, rooms set up for animal surgery, spaces that could hold bears or elk, and most importantly, privacy. Our faraway location and strict rules about keeping secrets made us the best place for sensitive wildlife cases. I was in my office that Monday evening looking over genetic information from a study about grizzly bear groups when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Dr. Sarah Kim, our building director. "Victor, we have a situation," she said right away. Her voice sounded tight, which meant something serious was happening. "I need you in the main surgery room right now. And Victor, clear your schedule for the next few days. You're not going to believe this." I'd worked with Sarah for 12 years. She was smart, calm, and didn't make big dramatic statements. If she said I wouldn't believe something, it was worth paying attention to. "On my way," I said, quickly grabbing my lab coat. The walk from my office to the surgery room took maybe 3 minutes, but it felt longer. The building was quiet at this hour. Most of the workers had gone home, leaving just the small night team. My footsteps made echoes in the hallway, and I found myself walking faster, curiosity taking over my usual careful pace. When I pushed through the doors to the surgery room, I stopped completely. The room was set up for big surgery. Monitors beeping, for stands ready, surgery tools laid out on clean trays. But it was the exam table in the center that made me catch my breath. On the table lay something that shouldn't exist. It was huge, easily 8 feet long, covered in thick, dark brown hair stuck together with blood and dirt. The arms and legs looked wrong for any known ape. Arms that were too long, legs that were too thick. The hands alone were as big as dinner plates. And the face. The face looked familiar and completely strange at the same time. A heavy forehead, a wide flat nose, a jaw that stuck out a little, like a human face seen through bent glass, or a gorilla's face with disturbing human features. "Is that?" I couldn't finish the sentence. My science training was fighting with what my eyes saw. "A Bigfoot," Sarah said quietly, standing on the other side of the exam table. Beside her was Dr. Marcus Webb, our head animal doctor, and 2 animal doctor helpers I knew, Jennifer Ortiz and Kyle Patterson. All of them looked as shocked as I felt. "That's impossible," I said automatically. "Bigfoot doesn't exist. It's a myth, a story people tell. There's no scientific proof." "There is now," Marcus interrupted, pointing at the table. "Whatever this is, it's real. It's alive, and it's badly hurt." I moved closer, my scientist's brain finally catching up to the situation. "Where did it come from?" "Highway 2 near Stevens Pass," Sarah explained. "A logging truck hit it this morning. The driver called it in as a bear accident, but when state wildlife officers arrived, they realized it wasn't a bear. They brought it here because we have the equipment and the privacy to handle something this unusual." I walked around the exam table, noticing details. The creature was knocked out, breathing with difficulty. I could see big injuries, cuts across the chest, what looked like a broken leg, possible damage inside. Blood had been taken, bags hanging from 4 stands keeping it stable. "You've already started treatment," I noticed. "Had to," Marcus said. "It was going into shock. We've made it stable, but Victor, we need to know what we're dealing with. Is this a known species?" Some kind of changed bear? A gorilla that escaped from somewhere? We need your knowledge. I pulled on gloves and began a closer look. My hands were steady despite how strange the situation was. 15 years of science training took over. The hair was rough, thicker than human hair, but softer than gorilla fur. The skin beneath, where I could see it around the injuries, was dark, but not as dark as a gorilla's. The muscles were incredibly developed. This creature had to be amazingly strong. Can I take samples? I asked Sarah. That's why I called you. We need a full examination, DNA study, tissue samples, blood work, everything. I spent the next hour taking samples while Marcus and his team worked on treating the injuries. Hair samples, skin samples, blood samples. The creature stayed knocked out the whole time, given medicine to keep it calm and not feeling pain while we worked. As I collected samples, I couldn't stop thinking about what this meant. If this was really an unknown type of great ape in North America, it would completely change everything we knew about how apes changed over time, where animals live, and the study of hidden animals. This wasn't just a new species. This was possibly the most important biological discovery in 100 years. I need to test these samples right away, I said when I'd collected everything I needed. We need to know what we're looking at genetically. Agreed, Sarah said. But Victor, this stays completely secret until we understand what we have. No papers, no announcements, no leaks. If word gets out that we have a live Bigfoot here, we'll be overrun with media, people who study hidden animals, and every crazy person with a theory. I nodded. Scientific privacy was something I understood. Just us for now. I've made the others promise to keep it secret. We'll need more help eventually, but for the first analysis, I want our main team only. I took my samples to the genetics lab, a room I'd spent countless hours in over the years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was studying something that could rewrite textbooks. The DNA process took several hours. I worked carefully, following steps I'd done hundreds of times. But my hands were shaking slightly as I loaded the samples into the machine. This was it. This would tell us what we were really dealing with. The first results would take until morning, so I returned to the surgery room to check on the patient. Marcus and his team had finished their immediate work. The creature was stable, injuries cleaned and bandaged, legs set in a hard cast. It was breathing easier now. Monitors showing stable signs of life. Will it survive? I asked. Marcus nodded. Unless something goes wrong, yes. It's incredibly strong. The injuries that would kill a human or even a bear, this thing is handling really well. Whatever it is, it's tough. I pulled up a chair beside the exam table, staring at the creature. With its eyes closed and breathing steadily, it looked almost peaceful, almost human. Has it woken up at all? I asked. Briefly when we first brought it in, Jennifer said. She was a young helper, maybe 26, but good at her job and calm. It looked right at me and Victor. There was intelligence there, not animal intelligence. Something more. Did it try to communicate? No. Just looked at me for a few seconds. Then Marcus gave it medicine to fully knock it out for the surgery. But I swear it understood what was happening. It knew we were trying to help. I spent the rest of the night in that room, watching the creature, taking notes, noticing everything. At some point, I fell asleep in my chair. I woke to the sound of alarms. The monitors were going crazy, and the creature's eyes were open. Not just open, staring directly at me with a strength that made me freeze in my chair. Dark eyes, deeply intelligent, studying me with the same curiosity I'd been showing it. We looked at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it made a sound, low, deep, almost like a question. It's okay, I said softly, using the calm tone I'd use with any scared patient. You're safe. We're helping you. You were hit by a truck, but you're going to be okay. The creature tilted its head slightly, still watching me. Then impossibly, it raised its uninjured arm and pointed at the cast on its leg. Then it pointed at me. The message was clear. You did this. Yes, I said, my heart pounding. "We set your leg. It was broken. The cast will help it heal." The creature studied the cast for a moment, then looked back at me. And then it did something that made my scientific view of the world crack wide open. It nodded. A clear, deliberate nod of understanding. This wasn't just an unknown type of ape. This was something else entirely. I immediately called for Marcus and Sarah. Within minutes, the three of us stood around the exam table, watching as the creature followed our movements with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "It's been awake for about 5 minutes," I explained, keeping my voice low and calm. "It understands us. Watch." I pointed at the cast on its leg, then at myself. "We helped you. Fixed your leg." The creature looked at the cast, then at me, and nodded again. Sarah made a loud gasp. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That level of understanding, communication using symbols, that's human-level intelligence." "Or close to it," I agreed. "Sarah, we need those DNA results now. Something's not adding up here." As if right on time, my pager went off. The genetics lab. The results were ready. "Stay with it," I told Marcus. "Keep it calm. I'll be back as soon as I can." I practically ran to the genetics lab, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and worry. Dr. Lisa Chen, our senior geneticist, was at the computer, her face pale as she stared at the screen. "Lisa, what did you find?" She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear mixed with wonder. "Victor, you need to see this yourself. I've run the test 3 times. The results are, they're impossible." I moved beside her, looking at the screen. What I saw made my legs weak. I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep steady. "This can't be right," I said. "Test it again." "I already tested it 3 times, Lisa repeated. "Victor, the results are the same. I don't understand how, but they're the same." The DNA test was clear. The creature's genes were 98.7% the same as human DNA. That was closer than chimpanzees, which shared about 96% with humans. But what made my blood run cold was the specific nature of the similarities. "Look at chromosome 2, Lisa said, pointing at the screen. "It's a joining of 2 chromosomes, just like in humans. This is the key marker that makes humans different from other great apes. But look at these sequences." "I see them," I said, scrolling through the information. "These genes here, they're connected with human brain development. The FOXP2 gene involved in speech and language. The HAR1 gene linked to brain development. This creature has human-specific genes." "Not just has them," Lisa corrected. "Look closer at how active they are. These genes are working, Victor, fully working." I spent the next hour looking through the information, comparing it with every ape genome in our database. The conclusion was unavoidable and scary in what it meant. "This isn't a separate species that changed alongside humans," I said slowly, the realization hitting me. "This is, Lisa, this is human, or it was. This is a branch of the human family tree." "That's impossible," Lisa said, but her voice didn't sound sure. "There's no proof of any other human species surviving into modern times. Neanderthals died out 40,000 years ago, Denisovans even earlier." "Not all of them," I said, my mind racing. "What if some groups survived? What if they adapted to life in deep forests, became stronger, grew more hair for cold weather? Over thousands of years, they'd look different, but genetically..." I stopped talking, staring at the information. Then something else caught my eye. "Lisa, look at this. These markers here, they're showing recent separation. This isn't a species that split from humanity millions of years ago. This split happened relatively recently in terms of evolution." "How recently?" I did the math, checking it twice. "Between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans were spreading out of Africa." The meaning was huge. Bigfoot wasn't some undiscovered ape. It was human, a parallel branch of humanity that had survived, hidden in the remote forests of the world while Homo sapiens took over everywhere else. "We need to tell Sarah," Lisa said. "Victor, do you understand what this means? This changes everything about human evolution, about our understanding of who we are and where we came from." I printed out the results and headed back to the surgery room, my mind spinning. Sarah was waiting outside, and I could see Marcus through the window, still watching the creature. "Victor, what did you find?" I handed her the printout. "You're not going to believe this." Sarah read through the information, her eyes growing wider with each page. When she looked up at me, she was pale. "This is saying, it's human. A subspecies of human." "Yes. Or perhaps more accurately, a sister species, like how Neanderthals were to Homo sapiens. But Sarah, it survived. An entire population has been living alongside us for thousands of years, and we never knew." "That's impossible. We would have found remains, fossils, evidence." "Would we?" I interrupted. "They clearly avoid humans. They live in the most remote areas, and if their population is small enough, scattered enough, their remains would be incredibly rare. Plus, if they have cultural practices around their dead, I thought about various native legends of Bigfoot burial grounds, stories I dismissed as folklore. We might never find them." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "We need to go in there and try to communicate with it. If it's human, truly human, then we have a responsibility to treat it as such. Not as a specimen, but as what? A person." "That's exactly what it is," I said. "Sarah, we're not dealing with an animal here. We're dealing with another type of human being. One that's been hiding from us for thousands of years." We entered the surgery room together. The creature was still awake, its eyes following us. Marcus stepped aside, giving us space. "I'm going to try something," I said. I pulled up a chair and sat down, putting myself at eye level with the creature, not standing over it, not in a position of power, as an equal. "Can you understand me?" I asked clearly. The creature watched me for a moment, then nodded. One clear, deliberate nod. My heart raced. "Do you have language? Can you speak?" It opened its mouth, and a sound came out. A low sound that had structure, rhythm. Not random noise, but something that sounded like it could be words. But the body structure was different. The voice box not shaped quite the same as a human's. The sounds were there, but not quite forming human speech. "Your voice structure is different," I said, more to myself than to it. "You probably have your own language, but you can't make our sounds." The creature made a frustrated sound, then did something remarkable. It pointed at its throat, made a sound, then shook its head. Then it pointed at its ears and nodded. Then it pointed at me and copied my mouth moving. "You can understand our language, but you can't speak it," I figured out. "You're telling me you understand what I'm saying, but you can't respond in words." It nodded strongly, and I saw what looked like relief in its eyes. Finally, someone understood. "Can you communicate in other ways?" "Hand movements, signs." It held up its good hand and began making deliberate movements with its fingers. Not random movements, but organized signs. It was using a form of sign language. "Sarah, get me paper and a pen," I said, never taking my eyes off the creature. When she brought them, I set them on the table within the creature's reach. "Can you write?" It looked at the paper, then at the pen, then at its bandaged hand and the cast on its leg. It made a frustrated sound. Clearly, it wanted to, but couldn't with its injuries. "Okay, different approach," I said. "I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. Nod for yes. Shake your head for no. Understand." A nod. "Are there more of you? More of your kind?" A nod. "Do they live in these forests?" Another nod. "Have you been watching us humans?" A nod, and something in its eyes that might have been tiredness. "Are you afraid of us?" A long pause. Then slowly, it nodded. The weight of that simple movement hit me hard. This being, this person, had lived their entire life in fear of my species, hiding, watching, avoiding contact at all costs. And now here it was, injured and helpless in our hands. "We won't hurt you," I said softly. "I promise. We want to help. We want to understand." It studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes searching mine. Then it did something that made my throat tight. It reached out with its good hand and touched my arm. Just a brief touch, a sign of trust. "Victor," Sarah said quietly, "we need to decide what we do next. We can't keep this secret forever. The state wildlife officers know we have something unusual here. And when it's healthy enough to leave," I said firmly, "we let it go. Back to its people. But first, I want to learn everything I can, with its permission." I looked at the creature. "Will you stay? Let us study you, learn from you. And in exchange, we'll help you heal. We'll protect your secret." It looked at each of us in turn. Me, Sarah, Marcus, Lisa, who had joined us, Jennifer, and Kyle. Judging us, deciding if it could trust us with the greatest secret in human history. Finally, it nodded. Over the next 3 days, we set up a system of communication that changed everything I thought I knew about human history. Jennifer, our animal doctor helper, had taken a class in American Sign Language in college, and she became our main interpreter. The creature, I refused to call it anymore, but didn't have a name yet, learned remarkably quickly to use standard signs combined with its own hand language. On the 3rd day, I brought in a whiteboard and markers. The creature's injured arm was healing well enough that it could hold the marker, though its hand control was clearly designed for larger, more forceful movements rather than fine detail. Still, it could draw. "Can you show us where you come from?" I asked, setting up the whiteboard. It took the marker in its huge hand and began to draw. Not random marks, but a deliberate map. Mountains, valleys, rivers. It drew with surprising accuracy, and I recognized the land. The Cascade Range stretching from Northern California through Oregon and Washington up into British Columbia. It tapped the marker on several locations in the most remote mountainous areas. Then it drew simple figures, pictures of its people. Small groups scattered across hundreds of miles. "How many of you are there?" I asked. It paused, thinking. Then it drew marks on the board. Groups of 5 lines. It made 7 groups, then started an 8th, but stopped partway through. Roughly 37 or 38 individuals. "That's all?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with sadness. "In the entire Pacific Northwest?" The creature nodded, and there was something deeply sad in its eyes. It drew more on the board. Stick figures representing its people, then crossing them out one by one. A visual picture of their numbers going down. "You're dying out," I said softly. "Your species is going extinct." It nodded again, then drew something else. Human figures, many of them, spreading across the board. Then it drew barriers between the humans and its people. Mountains, forests, rivers. It pointed at the human figures, then made a gesture at itself and shook its head fearfully. "You've been hiding from us," I said. "For how long?" It thought for a moment, then began drawing on the board. This time it drew phases of the moon, then sun symbols, seasons, years. It drew so many marks that they filled the board, then made a motion to show even more beyond what it could show. "Thousands of years," Lisa Chen breathed. "You've been hiding from humans for thousands of years." The creature nodded strongly. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It drew human figures with spears, hunting. It drew its own people running, falling. It drew what could only be seen as violence, fighting, death. "We hunted you," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the stomach. "Early humans, when we first met your people, we hunted you, competed with you, drove you away." It nodded, then drew more. It showed its people going back into the mountains, into the deepest forests, learning to hide, to avoid humans at all costs. It was showing us a history of survival through hiding. "Is that why you're so scattered?" Marcus asked. "Small groups in remote areas, avoiding any place humans might go?" Another nod. Then it drew something else. "Family groups." A larger figure with smaller ones. It pointed at itself, then drew two smaller figures and made a cradling motion. You have children, I said. A family. The creature's eyes filled with what I could only understand as pain. It nodded, then pointed at itself, trapped here in our facility. It made a questioning motion. When could it go home? Soon, I promised. As soon as you're healed enough to travel safely. We'll take you back. Over the following days, I spent every spare moment with the creature, learning. We developed a more advanced communication system, using a combination of signs, drawings, and yes-no questions. And what I learned was amazing. The creature's people had names for themselves, a word that roughly translated to the forest people or the hidden ones. They had language, culture, traditions. They passed down spoken histories through generations, teaching their young about the world, and especially about the dangers of humans. They knew about us in incredible detail. They'd been watching us for thousands of years, learning our languages by listening from the shadows, understanding our behaviors and patterns. They knew about our cities, our technologies, our wars. They'd watched human civilization rise and spread across their ancestral lands, forcing them into smaller and smaller pockets of wilderness. Why didn't you ever try to make contact? I asked on the 5th day. Why hide instead of communicating? The creature drew on the board again. It showed early attempts at contact. Its ancestors approaching human settlements, trying to trade or communicate. And it showed what happened next. Fear, violence, hunting parties. It drew humans killing its people, taking bodies as trophies. Then it drew something from more recent history, the 1960s or 70s, based on the clothing it sketched on the human figures. It showed one of its people being captured, taken away. It drew what looked like a laboratory. Scientists. Then it drew the figure of its person no longer moving. Dead. Someone captured one of you, Sarah said, her voice empty. Experimented on it. Killed it. The creature nodded, its expression serious. Then it made a motion that clearly meant, that's why we hide. That's why we fear you. I am so sorry, I said, and I meant it with every part of my being. My species has done terrible things. But I swear to you, we're not all like that. We want to understand, not harm. We want to help. It studied me for a long moment, then placed its hand over its chest and made a motion I'd come to recognize as trust. It was choosing to believe me. On the 6th day, I asked the question that had been bothering me since I first saw the DNA results. Your people and mine split apart tens of thousands of years ago, I said. But you're so similar to us. The DNA, the intelligence, the culture. Why did we separate? What made your ancestors become what you are and mine become what we are? The creature considered this, then drew on the board. 2 groups of early humans, identical. Then it drew one group in open plains, grasslands. It drew them hunting with tools, building fires, living in groups. It pointed at me. My ancestors. Then it drew the other group in dense forests, mountains. It drew them adapting to that environment, growing larger, stronger, more hair for cold weather, learning to live in smaller family groups in places where resources were scattered. It pointed at itself. Its ancestors. Different environments created different changes over time, I said, understanding. My ancestors stayed in open environments, developed technology, social complexity. Yours adapted to deep forest life, became physically stronger, but remained in small, scattered groups. It nodded. Then it drew something else that made me pause. It showed both groups meeting occasionally over thousands of years. Sometimes fighting, but sometimes trading, communicating. You mixed with us, I said suddenly. Just like modern humans did with Neanderthals. There are probably genes from your people in some human populations. The creature made a motion that seemed like agreement. Then it pointed at certain human figures on the board and made a motion to show larger or hairier. It was suggesting that some humans who were particularly tall or strong might carry genetic markers from its people. The legends, Lisa said, who'd been watching this exchange. All the native stories about marriages between humans and forest spirits. The tales of giants in family lines. What if those weren't myths? What if they were actual historical memories of mixing? The creature nodded strongly. Then it drew something that made me catch my breath. It showed a timeline. The past, the present, and then a question mark for the future. It pointed at its people's shrinking numbers, then at the human figures spreading everywhere. It made a motion that clearly asked, "What happens to us now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Your population is critically small. In genetic terms, you're probably too few to survive long-term without severe problems from closely related breeding." The creature nodded sadly. It had already figured that out. "But maybe," I said slowly, an idea forming, "maybe we can help. If we revealed your existence to the world, we could protect your territories, prevent human expansion, maybe even help increase your numbers through conservation efforts." The creature's reaction was immediate and strong. It shook its head frantically, making distressed sounds. It drew on the board with quick, harsh strokes. Humans with cameras, guns, tranquilizer darts, cages, laboratories. Its people being captured, studied, imprisoned. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "Victor, we've seen what humans do to rare species. We study them, tag them, track them. We destroy their way of life in the name of protecting them." The creature drew one more image. Its people free in the forest. Hidden, yes. Declining, yes. But free. Then it drew them surrounded by humans, in facilities like this one. Protected perhaps, but caged. It pointed at the second image and made a motion that clearly meant death. Not physical death, but death of their identity, their culture, their freedom. "So we keep your secret," I said. "We protect you by not revealing you. Is that what you want?" It nodded. Then it drew something else. A few human figures separated from the rest. It pointed at us. A small group of humans who knew the truth and kept it. Guardians of the secret. "We can do that," I promised. "We'll protect your people by protecting your secret. But you have to let us help in other ways. Let us monitor your population's health. Maybe provide medical care when needed. Let us be allies, not just observers." The creature considered this for a long moment. Then it drew a symbol on the board. Two hands clasped together. A partnership. An agreement between our species. On the morning of September 25, 1998, 11 days after the creature had been brought to our facility, Marcus said it was healthy enough to return to the wild. The leg had healed remarkably fast, another sign of the strong body structure these beings had. The arm was still in a splint, but it could move well enough to get around the forest. "I want to come with you," I said to the creature as we prepared for its release. "I want to meet your family, see where you live, learn more about your people." It looked at me with those intelligent eyes, thinking. Then it nodded slowly and drew on the whiteboard. It sketched a warning. Steep land, difficult hiking, cold nights. It was telling me it wouldn't be easy. "I'm ready," I said. "I've done field work in remote locations before. I can handle it." Sarah was less excited about my plan. "Victor, we don't know what we're dealing with. What if there are more of them and they're not friendly? What if they see you as a threat?" "Then our friend here will explain that I'm not," I said, pointing at the creature. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime, Sarah, to observe an unknown human subspecies in their natural home, to record their culture, their way of life." "I have to go." After much debate, Sarah agreed, with conditions. I would carry a satellite phone, check in twice daily, and Marcus would come with me. We would bring medical supplies in case the creature's injuries got worse, and we'd document everything we safely could. We left at dawn on September 26th, driving as far into the mountains as the roads would take us. The creature sat in the back of our van, watching the landscape pass by with what seemed like relief. It was going home. When the roads ended, we hiked. The creature led the way despite its injuries, moving through the forest with practiced ease. Marcus and I struggled to keep up, our scientific equipment and supplies weighing us down as we climbed steep slopes and walked through dense undergrowth. We hiked for 6 hours, moving deeper into the Cascade Wilderness than any marked trail went. The creature stopped occasionally, checking landmarks. A rock shaped in a distinctive way, a particular tree, patterns that were invisible to my eyes but clearly meaningful to it. Finally, as afternoon shadows grew long, we reached a valley so remote and hidden that I understood immediately why these beings had never been found. It was surrounded by steep ridges, only accessible through narrow passages that would be easy to miss. The valley floor was covered in old-growth forest with a clear stream running through it. The creature stopped at the edge of the valley and made a loud carrying sound, a call announcing its return. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard answering calls from different parts of the valley, and slowly, figures came out from the forest. I counted 6 of them. Adults ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall, covered in hair that ranged from dark brown to reddish brown. They approached carefully, keeping their distance from Marcus and me, their attention fixed on our companion. Then 2 smaller figures burst from the trees, running toward us with clear joy. Children, if I could call them that, maybe 4 and 6 feet tall. They were calling out in their language, sounds that were clearly Papa, or the equivalent. The creature dropped to its knees, and the young ones threw themselves into its arms. The reunion was so human, so full of emotion that I felt tears in my eyes. This was a father coming home to his children after they'd feared him dead. A female approached more slowly, larger than the young ones, but smaller than our companion, with lighter reddish fur. The mate, I realized. She and our friend touched foreheads, made soft sounds to each other. She looked at his injuries, her hands gentle on the splint and cast. Then she looked at Marcus and me. Her eyes were careful, protective. She made a questioning sound to her mate. "Who are these humans?" Our companion motioned for us to come closer. Slowly, carefully, we approached. The other adults formed a protective circle, ready to step in if we were a threat. The creature began signing, along with sounds and motions. It was explaining what had happened. The accident, the injury, how we'd helped. It pointed at its healed leg, at the splint on its arm. It made motions that clearly showed healing, care, kindness. The female studied us for a long moment. Then she did something that made my throat tight. She approached me directly, her height making me look up to meet her eyes. She placed one huge hand on my shoulder. Not threatening, but testing, judging. Then she made a motion to her mate, something like approval or acceptance. She turned to the others and made a sound that made them relax slightly. "I think she just told them we're okay," Marcus whispered beside me. Over the next 3 days, we were allowed to stay in the valley, watch, and record what we saw. It was the most amazing experience of my life in studying people. The group had 3 family units living close together. Our companion's family, himself, his mate, and 2 children. An older male who appeared to be alone, possibly his mate had died, and a younger couple with a baby. They lived in structures that could barely be called shelters. More like carefully arranged branches and bark that gave protection from rain and wind while staying camouflaged. They moved these shelters with the seasons, following food sources and avoiding areas where humans might go. Their tools and materials were simple but smart. They used stone tools, not fancy but effective for the tasks they needed. They knew which plants were safe to eat, which had healing properties. They hunted small animals using traps and their considerable strength, and they fished using techniques that showed remarkable patience and skill. But what interested me most was their social structure and culture. They had language, complex sounds that carried meaning, added to by hand movements and body language. They told stories to their young, teaching them about the world and their history. I recorded some of these sessions, though I couldn't understand the words. They had art, too. On a smooth rock face in the valley, protected from weather, were drawings, pictures that recorded their history. I saw images that showed their people once living in larger groups, then being scattered by humans. I saw pictures of different landscapes where their ancestors had lived. Forests, mountains, even what looked like coastal areas. They used to have a much larger area, I told Marcus as we studied the pictures. These images suggest they lived all along the Pacific coast from California to Alaska. But human expansion pushed them into smaller and smaller territories. The older male approached while we studied the rock art. He made a motion for us to follow and led us to another area of the valley, to a place where the ground was different. Deliberately arranged stones forming slight mounds. "A cemetery," Marcus breathed. "They bury their dead." The old male confirmed this with a nod. He pointed at the graves, then at himself, making motions that told a story. His mate was buried here. His siblings, his parents. This valley had been their home for generations. He led us to one grave in particular, smaller than the others. He knelt beside it, touching the stones with a gentleness that went beyond species. Then he looked at us and made a series of motions. "A child. His child. Dead many years ago." "How?" I asked gently. He drew in the dirt. "A human figure with a gun. Hunters," he showed. "They'd shot at him and his family. His child had been hit. They'd run, but the young one had died from the wound." "I'm so sorry," I said, the words feeling not enough. He looked at me with eyes that held ancient sadness, then made a motion that seemed to mean, "This is why we hide. This is why we fear you." That night, sitting around a small fire they'd made in a sheltered area, I watched the three families interact. The children played, wrestling and chasing each other with sounds that were clearly laughter. The adults prepared food, tended the fire, communicated with each other in their complex language. They were people. Different from us in appearance, adapted to a different way of life, but fundamentally people. They had families, culture, history, emotions, intelligence. They loved their children, mourned their dead, told stories, made art. And they were dying out. 37 individuals, I said to Marcus quietly. Even if we assume there are other groups we don't know about, the total population can't be more than a few hundred at most. They're functionally extinct. What can we do? Marcus asked. We promised not to reveal them. I don't know, I admitted. If we tell the world, they lose their freedom. If we stay silent, they slowly disappear. Either way, we're watching the end of a people. Our companion must have heard us talking. He approached and sat down beside us. He drew in the dirt with a stick. A timeline stretching into the future. He drew his people's population getting smaller, then eventually disappearing entirely. You know you're going extinct, I said. He nodded. Then he drew something else. A small group of humans. He pointed at us, then drew lines connecting us to his people. Then he drew symbols I'd come to recognize as meaning remember or tell. You want us to remember? I said, understanding. When you're gone, you want someone to know you existed, to tell your story. He nodded strongly. Then he drew more images of his people's history, their culture, their way of life. He pointed at my recording equipment, at my notebooks. He made a motion that clearly meant, document everything. Be a witness. That's why you let us stay, Marcus realized. You're not just allowing us. You're actively choosing to share your culture with us because you know it's ending. You want someone to remember. The creature touched his chest, then pointed at his family, at the others in the valley. Then he pointed at the graves. Finally, he pointed at me and touched his chest again. The message was clear. When we're gone, our memory will live in you. I promise, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'll document everything. I'll preserve your history, your culture, your story. And someday, when the time is right, I'll make sure the world knows. Not where you lived, not how to find you, but who you were. What you meant. That you were people, and you deserved better than what we gave you. He placed his hand on my shoulder, the same motion his mate had made when accepting us. A motion of trust, of understanding, of shared grief for what was being lost. That night, I lay awake in my tent, listening to the sounds of the valley. I could hear the creatures settling in their shelters, the soft sounds between mates, the quiet sounds of children being comforted to sleep. I was witnessing something that shouldn't be happening. The slow, quiet extinction of an entire branch of humanity. Not through some big catastrophe, but through gradual displacement, through being pushed into territories too small to support their population, through isolation and the unavoidable mathematics of genetic problems from small populations. And the worst part was knowing that we, Homo sapiens, were responsible. Our expansion, our dominance, our fear of anything that looked like us but wasn't quite us. We'd driven our own cousins to the edge of extinction, and most of humanity would never even know they'd existed. I woke before dawn on our fourth morning in the valley. A thin mist clung to the trees, and the air had that deep, earthy smell that only old-growth forests seem to hold. The others were still asleep, but I could hear soft movement near the stream. I stepped out of my tent and followed the sound. Our companion, the father we had first met in the lab, was kneeling beside the water. His children slept curled against their mother a short distance away. He didn't look up as I approached, but I sensed he knew I was there. He traced his fingers along the surface of the stream, drawing swirling patterns in the water. I sat beside him silently, unsure if this was a private moment I was interrupting. After a while, he signed slowly, using the motions we had developed together. "Time is short." I nodded. "I know." He pointed to the valley around us, then to the sky, then made a fading motion. Their world disappearing. Then he tapped my chest once, twice, firmly. "You must remember." "I will," I promised. "But there must be something more we can do. Some way to help." He shook his head slowly. Then he pointed toward the distant mountains, tracing a path. I understood. There were other small groups scattered across the range. Fewer than here. Some even more remote. He couldn't tell me how many remained, only that they were shrinking. "Have you contacted them?" I asked. He hesitated, then made a motion that meant, "Too far, too dangerous." I understood. Crossing into human-occupied areas risked exposure. Many of their kind had already died that way. We returned to camp as the first rays of sunlight touched the ridge. The rest of the valley slowly woke. Children played, adults stretched in the cold morning air. It was ordinary and beautiful and deeply tragic because I knew how fragile it all was. Marcus was boiling water for instant coffee when I walked back into camp. "You look like you didn't sleep much," he said. "I didn't," I admitted. He, made it clear. "Their time is limited." Marcus stared into the steam rising from the pot. "I'm starting to think the best we can do is exactly what we're doing. Learn, record, honor their story." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Every instinct as a scientist screamed that we had to take action, step in, protect. But as a human, as a guest in their home, I felt an equally strong duty: do no harm. And revealing them to the world would almost certainly destroy them. At midday, the father motioned for me to follow him deeper into the forest. Marcus stayed behind with the families. The older male, quiet and serious, joined us. We walked for nearly an hour, winding between ancient cedars and moss-covered rocks until we reached a narrow rocky gap hidden behind a fallen trunk. The father ducked inside first. I hesitated, then followed. The passage opened into a small cave. Faint light filtered down through cracks in the ceiling, and along the walls, painted with colors I didn't recognize, were scenes more detailed than anything in the valley pictures. They told a story, not of their past, but of ours. Early humans, thin and small compared to the forest people, moving across plains. Fires, tools, hunting. Then the two peoples meeting. Sometimes peacefully, sometimes in conflict. The scenes showed gifts exchanged, marriages, villages shared for brief periods. Then came others. Humans in greater numbers, with new tools. Spears, bows, later firearms. The forest people driven into mountains. Fewer and fewer. At the end of the painting were small groups scattered across vast spaces. Then single figures. Then nothing. A quiet prediction. Extinction. I ran my hand lightly along the wall, afraid to disturb the paint. The father tapped a symbol near the final image. An outline of a human figure with a small circle painted where the heart would be. "This is," I whispered. He pointed at me. A keeper. A storyteller. A witness. I felt my throat tighten. I don't deserve that, I said softly. He shook his head. Not deserve. Chosen. There was no pride in his motion, no sense of worship, just necessity. Someone had to carry the truth. When we exited the cave, the older male touched my arm and led me behind a cluster of rocks. There, nearly hidden under a covering of leaves and branches, was a bundle wrapped in woven fibers. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside were objects unlike anything we'd seen among them before. A carved stone tablet. Detailed, deliberate. Not pictures, but symbols. Script. My breath caught. Writing. I glanced at the father. He nodded slowly, then signed old before hiding. My mind spun. Their ancestors had once had a written language, something they'd abandoned when forced into secrecy. This object had been hidden away for generations, perhaps passed from elder to elder. The stone tablet showed scenes similar to the cave drawings. Early contact, cooperation, and a warning. Figures with strange symbols like early human tools approaching. Conflict. Flight. Scattering. At the bottom was a final line of symbols arranged differently from the rest. I pointed. What does this mean? I asked. The father hesitated, then made a motion he'd never used before. Both hands pressed to his chest, then extended outward, palms up. We give this to you. I froze. No. I can't take this. This is your history. He shook his head firmly. Then he pointed back toward the cave paintings. The story of extinction. Then to the stone tablet. If we keep, all will be lost. I felt a weight settle on my shoulders, heavier than any scientific responsibility I'd ever known. I will protect it, I said at last. But only if you are certain. He pressed his forehead lightly to mine, a motion I'd seen him use with his children. His answer was final. When we returned to camp, the others were waiting. Their expressions told me they understood what had happened. This wasn't just a gift. It was a transfer of guardianship. That evening, the father gathered the families around a fire. He signed a story. Long, slow, rhythmic. The children listened wide-eyed. The adults responded with quiet affirmations. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt the meaning. This was not a story for them. This was a story for me. For humanity. A father passing the responsibility to another father, not by blood, but by choice. When the story ended, he turned to me and signed, "Tomorrow." I nodded. Our time here was ending. Later, alone in my tent, I held the stone tablet wrapped in cloth. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from awe. This was the most important artifact in the history of humankind, and no museum, no university, no government could ever know of it. Not yet. Outside, the valley grew quiet. I heard the soft calls of the forest people settling for the night. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere else a voice sang low and melodic. I wondered how many such nights they had left. I wondered if someday their songs would be heard only in memory, carried not by them, but by us. Tomorrow we would return to the world, and nothing would ever be the same. We left the valley at dawn. The farewell was quiet, respectful. No dramatic hugs, no final speeches. That wasn't their way. They gathered near the tree line where sunlight filtered through the cedars, painting long golden shafts across the mossy ground. The children clung to their mother while the father stood beside us, calm and firm. He placed a hand on my shoulder, then on Marcus's. A blessing. A goodbye. Then he signed one word we both understood clearly. Remember. We bowed our heads, then turned to begin the long journey out of the mountains. The hike back felt heavier than the journey in. Every crunch of leaves under my boots reminded me we were leaving behind a world few humans had ever seen, a world that might not exist in a few decades. The forest seemed to sense the weight of our leaving. Each whisper of whine through the branches felt like a quiet sadness. Marcus walked in silence, occasionally glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting our companion to appear again. But we saw no one. If they were watching, they stayed hidden, guardians of a secret older than our civilization. When we reached the van, I felt a pang of disbelief. The steel frame and dusty windshield looked impossibly out of place after the ancient peace of the valley. It was as if we had stepped out of a dream and back into a world that suddenly seemed too loud, too bright, too careless. On the drive back to the research facility, neither of us spoke until we were halfway down the mountain. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "What are we going to tell them?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. The truth was impossible. And yet hiding everything felt like betrayal. "We'll tell them we found evidence of a small undocumented primate species," I said slowly. "We'll say it appears non-threatening and should be left alone. No samples, no remains, nothing to study further." Marcus nodded, though I could tell the lie sat as poorly with him as it did with me. We arrived back at the facility shortly after midday. Sarah and Lisa met us in the loading bay, their expressions a mix of relief and worry. "Where is he?" Sarah asked. "Home," I said simply. "He's safe." They exchanged a look. Not disappointment exactly, but something close to frustration. They had been hoping to continue learning, I knew. But they also understood the promise we had made. Sarah led us into the conference room. "Tell us everything." So we did, carefully. We described the valley, the family structure, the culture, the cave paintings. We explained the small population and the dangers they faced. We provided just enough detail to show the seriousness of their situation, but left out anything that might lead others to them. I felt the weight of the stone tablet tucked safely in my backpack as I spoke. I didn't reveal it, not yet. Even within our trusted circle, the fewer who knew, the safer the tablet would be. When we finished, the room was silent. "So they really are," Lisa began. "Yes," I said. "A sister species. Human." Sarah took a slow breath. "Victor, what do we do with this information?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. "We do nothing," I said. "We protect them by protecting their silence. No publications, no press, no announcements. We lock the records. Only those in this room, plus Jennifer and Kyle, know the full truth. And no one says a word unless every one of us agrees." Marcus nodded. Lisa, too. After a moment, Sarah agreed. "We keep the circle small." For a few weeks, that fragile agreement held. We returned to routine tasks. Habitat studies, genetic work, conservation projects. But something had shifted inside me. Every time I looked at the trees outside my office window, I imagined the father and his family. I wondered what stories they were telling their children. I wondered if they still felt safe. Then in early October, everything changed. It began with a phone call from a state wildlife officer, the same officer who had originally brought the injured father to us. "I need to speak to Dr. Hartley," he said. His voice was tense. "This is Hartley. We've received reports of sightings. Unusual animals near Stevens Pass." I felt my pulse spike. "Where exactly?" He gave a location roughly 20 miles from the valley. "Could just be bears," he added. "But the descriptions, well, I thought you'd want to know." I thanked him and hung up, then called Marcus and Sarah. Within an hour, the three of us were in the van heading toward the reported area. When we arrived, my worst fears were confirmed. Truck tracks cut through the brush, deep grooves made by heavy tires. There were footprints, too. Large, familiar. Forest people. But there were other signs as well. Broken branches, disturbed soil, signs of struggle. But no blood. And boot prints. Many of them. "Someone else has been here," Marcus whispered. We followed the tracks for nearly a mile before the trail disappeared at a rocky outcrop. Beyond it, the land sloped into dense forest, impossible to track without dogs or special gear. "Could they have been taken?" Sarah asked quietly. "I don't know," I said, but dread coiled in my stomach. The father had told us other groups lived farther out, more isolated, more vulnerable. Someone must have stumbled across one. As we stood in that silent clearing, I felt something I had never felt before. Helplessness. We had promised to protect them, but protection meant invisibility, and invisibility meant we couldn't step in without exposing them. We returned to the facility, unsettled. For weeks, I waited for more news. Reports came occasionally. Strange sounds in the forest. Glimpses of tall shapes moving at night. Nothing solid, nothing we could act on. Just whispers. The months passed. Winter settled over the mountains. Snow sealed the valley behind a shimmering wall of white. Access became impossible. I waited. Spring came. The snows melted. And at the first opportunity, I returned to the valley alone. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't bring Marcus. I needed to see for myself. I hiked 2 days through terrain rougher than I remembered. When I finally reached the valley, my heart sank. It was empty. No shelters, no fires, no signs of recent living. Just silence. I searched for 2 days. No footprints, no tools, no traces except the carefully maintained graves, untouched and still honored. The forest people were gone. I don't know whether they left voluntarily, moving deeper into the mountains, or whether they were forced to run. Perhaps they sensed danger long before we did. Perhaps they had known all along their time here was limited. Before I left, I returned to the cave. The paintings remained, but another image had been added. A figure, tall, human, holding a stone tablet. A single tear falling from its eye. I touched the fresh color with shaking fingers. They had known I would return, and they had left me a message. A farewell. I stood there for a long time in the quiet heart of the mountain and let myself grieve. Not just for the friend I had made, not just for his family, but for the entire branch of our shared humanity disappearing into shadow. Somewhere out there, they may still be alive. Hidden, watching, waiting for the world to change or for memory to fade. I returned to civilization, carrying the tablet and my notes. I sealed away everything, photographs, sketches, recordings, in a temperature-controlled archive. I made copies, hid them in secure places. If something happened to me, the record would survive. But the truth would remain silent until the world was ready. Their story deserved nothing less. So now I tell it. Carefully, quietly, with the same promise I made beside a forest fire in a hidden valley. To remember, to honor, to protect. Because some truths are too important to reveal and too sacred to forget.